Today, I'm joined by Melissa Gonzalez. Melissa is a seasoned leader at the intersection of creative strategy, business transformation, and human centered design, with decades of experience advising global brands. As a principal at MG2 and a shareholder at Coilers Engineering and Design, she's helped retailers build deeper connections and long term value in an evolving world. Her latest book is called The Purpose Pivot, where she explores how intuition and vulnerability shape stronger leadership. After a personal health crisis reshaped her perspective, Melissa now helps leaders align performance with clarity, well being, and purpose from the inside out. I'm excited to have her on the show so we can all learn from her experience. So, Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, and it's great to have you on the show. And I'm excited to talk about this book. But first of all, take us back to the moment that led you to write The Purpose Pivot. Now, what was happening in your life that made this message unavoidable?
Yes, for me, it was definitely one of those stop yourself and your tracks moment, which I'm hoping the book prevents people from having to get to that point to have some of these learnings. But, for me, it was a medical moment that happened in January of 2024, but it was after a little over a year of my body sending me signals and telling me that I wasn't myself. And I listened, but I didn't prioritize it until it all came to a head. And why it led to a book was it was so poignant in that I went beyond telling people about it, so much so I wrote down on a piece of paper at the end of 2023 that I was going to do this Better You challenge. I was going to do it with my family. I was going to focus on better gut health. And I didn't know how, but I was going to start it on January 10th. And I wrote that on a piece of paper. And it was exactly January 10th to the day when I was woken out of my sleep on a business trip across the country in excruciating pain, which led me to the ER to be told that I needed to go into emergency surgery for my gut. The
Hmm.
exact day I wrote on that piece of paper. And so for me, that was a bigger message of I knew it so much I wrote it down. I still didn't make it my priority, but the universe stepped in and everything that could go right given the circumstances did. So that was the first thing that really stood out to me. And then I had to heal for about 3 months, and in that time I had a lot of dialogue. And when I first shared what I had gone through more publicly, the response I got was unexpected in that it was a lot of people, of course, checking in on me. I'm glad you're okay, but so many then feeling the permission to share their stories with me and not having done that beyond an immediate circle in the past. And it was so many similar stories of people who had these forced pauses due to physical illness, mental illness, whatever it was, but not wanting anybody to know because they didn't want anybody to think they were weak.
Hmm.
And so that was the number one thing that said to me, we need to change this dialogue because these are not moments of weakness, but it is in these moments that we tend to step back, really listen, reprioritize. And it's kind of an evolution of that starting point for me and all the dialogue I'm having now and my continuous learning through those conversations.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think we saw a little bit of it, or a lot of it on a macro scale in the COVID pandemic, where
Hmm.
that little pause, like you mentioned, got a lot of people to say, I don't think I'm in the job I want, or I don't think I'm doing the things I want to do in my life. And so we saw a lot of people pivoting in that period of time, I think.
Yeah.
But your story, resonates with me. I've heard that story many times where people have, you're running full blast, you're doing what you think you're put on earth to do, and then something happens where all of a sudden you're like, well, maybe I need to reevaluate some of my priorities, right? So something that
Hmm.
stops you in your tracks. It was so in your case, this was a health issue, right? And for others, it's you get fired from a job, or there's downsizing. There's always something that sort of is like a wake up call, right?
Yeah, it is a wake up call, right? And I think what I've become more attuned to is all the things I feel when my body's speaking to me again now. And
Yeah.
and first step, recognizing that, now listening to it more and also then saying to myself, well, what are you doing that with that information versus just powering through, which I think we've all become more conditioned to do. Power through it, hustle your way to success. But oftentimes, even if we reach those things, I've had a lot of successes. I've founded a company. I was acquired. We were acquired again. Like there's a lot of great successes on the outside. People would see I've traveled, all over the world. I've done all these things. But if what's most important is that it feels fulfilling to do that. And I think that's the part that needs more realignment. And when you put purpose at the core of your filter system, I think it helps you sort through the noise a little bit more of that busyness and really be able to say, am I doing the things that really fuel me?
I love that. So, you mentioned it. You've been, talking about it, and people are reading the book. The book's been out for about 6 months now. What kind of feedback are you getting? What are people when they see this book, when they hear your story, how is it resonating with them? What are some of the stories you're hearing?
Yeah, so I picked a lane when I wrote the book in that this is not just my story. I interviewed, or spoke to 35 women. So some are deeper interviews, some are more quotes, because I'd heard them speak and got permission to reshare. But I would say the universal resonance, I wasn't sure what that would be. I had a point of view that I brought to the book, but I think the surprising part has been that consistent confirmation of the universality of it. Like whether it's
Yeah.
people who are early in their career, people who have retired and thinking, what am I doing next in my life? Women, men, I speak at universities now, but I'll also speak at corporate environments. And so it's a spectrum in that they're in different life stages, but I think the universal thing is a recognition that we all have the signals and we need a system a little bit in place to help us figure out like what are the right tools to help us navigate
Mm,
when those signals happen. What does clarity look like? It might look different than we think, but it is a message of saying something needs to be looked at. And then what
yeah.
do we do to take the next steps? And I think along our lives, we have these different chapters. And I think people starting to recognize more, you can get so trapped in this is what this chapter looked like. So that's what helped define everything forever. But life
Mm,
changes. And so navigating through that, whatever life stage you're at, is a constant kind of self journey that you take. And I think people recognize that and just want more guidance into how they can be better in tune with themselves so that they can create this system that allows them to feel fulfilled as they go through those life stages of success. And I think there's a lot of avenues of inner clarity that people have found, but bridging that to what does that mean to my external
mm.
impact is the
Yeah.
bridge that a lot of people seem to be looking for still.
And I love how you say this because I think it's important. I'm a little older now, so I've been through several stages in my life or chapters, if you will. And I think it's interesting to, I think when I started out, I thought, well, I just do one thing for the rest of my life, right? And that's not what life is like. Like
Hmm.
you find, like I had very strong purpose when I was in the military, right? And then when I got out of the military, I struggled to find my purpose again. And then I got into manufacturing, turning around struggling manufacturing businesses. I found my passion again. I found my purpose again.
Mm.
And I did that for so long that I sort of got bored with it. I got, and I said, I got tired of the corporate life. And so I got the bug to start my own business. But what I'm saying is I think the purpose shifts over your lifetime. And I think
Hmm.
if you don't listen for the signals that maybe you're starting to be your purpose might have been okay when you're at a certain age or a certain time in your life, but things change and you may now be led in a different direction. So you have to listen, I guess you're saying, to those signals, whether they're physical signals or just even like thoughts and struggling. You're having those Sunday night, like, I just can't, I don't want to go into my job anymore, I hate my job. So that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and sometimes it's a mindset shift too. It doesn't always mean right you'll quit, but it might be your point of view of understanding what about it gets you excited too.
Yeah.
Because even though you've evolved in those three different avenues that you just shared, if you look back, there's probably a through line of your skill set and just a different
Yeah.
application of it that becomes more rewarding as you're in different stages of your life. So I think there's a pretty big spectrum of what that pivot could look like. Sometimes it's 45 degrees, sometimes it's 90 degrees, right?
Yeah.
Once in a
Yeah.
while might be that 180, um, but the first step is kind of letting yourself hear it, giving some breathing room.
Mm.
Not everything means you have to change. Sometimes maybe it's a tweak, but give yourself the space to just acknowledge it as a starting point, and I think over time you'll build that ability to be more and more attuned to what those signals are asking you to at least take a look at.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so, what are some signs that, or some early, what are some early signs that maybe there might be some misalignment with kind of the way you're living now, and maybe something that you might be wanting to pivot or might want to go in a different direction. So, what are some of those signs? And then, like, why do we often ignore them? I mean, like in your case, right? We sort
Yeah.
of ignore it, just keep moving forward. Hustle, we always talk about resilience and being resilient and push through, right? Um, but sometimes that
Yeah.
can be destructive. Yeah.
It can sometimes be destructive, and I think there's different ways you'll get signals. Sometimes it's you just find this ability to be less focused on it, and you're forcing yourself to focus when you might need to say, okay, do I need to reset in this moment? Is it I'm distracted, or is it because I'm not excited about it? Am I overloaded on other things that's not giving me the space to really focus on this? And maybe there's other things I have to clarify in order for like maybe this isn't the thing. It might be something that's on the periphery. So you don't automatically always know the answer. What you probably automatically know is that there's something to just evaluate. I think that's
Mm.
the first step. And because I had a lot of time to reevaluate when I had to heal, I became more cognizant to how my body was sending me signals. And so now when those things creep up, I'm like, oh, that's that thing again. So
Mm. Yeah.
oftentimes when we feel things on the outside, that physical manifestation is a result of so much tension that you're holding inside the body, right? So, if I had a bulging disc in my neck, and like, I was clenching my jaw, and
Yeah.
my shoulders were tight. And so, or there's other times where I feel like, oh, I'm not focused as much as I could be. And so now I'm aware those have become my warning signals. So I'll give myself some space. I'll say, do I need to be booked back to back every 30 minutes all day long? Like, what is the one thing on my calendar that's not essential that I'm going to take off the calendar today because I'm in that state, and I'm going to allow that to give me the space to take that walk, or to just kind of acknowledge this and say, is there something I need to shift right now? And it's just bringing in some of those little practices that I think it's building a muscle, and
Mm.
it'll allow you to become more cognizant of that, but not just the fact that you acknowledge that moment happened. Sometimes you'll figure out the answer right away, sometimes you don't. But if you do make a shift, even if it's tiny, also give yourself the space to observe, what did that shift feel like? Did it feel good? Because then over time, it's like a workout, right? You work out, you feel the benefit of that.
Yeah.
You're going to want to feel more of that. And so I think there's no cookie cutter answer. What is going to help you get to that path versus me, but going in that individual journey and just giving yourself a little bit of those options in your toolkit. Um, Acknowledge it, create some space that maybe you need right now, make some sort of shift, acknowledge what that shift left you feel like. Doing things like that over time, you'll start to make bigger changes,
Mm.
because you'll be able to
Yeah.
recognize those things. Yeah.
So I think what you're saying too is like don't ignore these things. These, whatever it is that, anxiety, or maybe you're frustrated, you're, whatever, even if it's just not a like, some of it maybe, like you said, stress, you can feel it in your body, and other times it's just you feel it in your emotions. And so you're
Hmm.
saying, be careful, listen to those noises. We laugh sometimes, my wife and I, we were Gen X, and we were taught to like go to work, never complain, just work for the man your whole life, get the
Just
gold
get
watch
through
and
it.
retire,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, now I see younger generations thinking about themselves more, and I'm like, where did we miss that in our, and so we're, my wife and I talk about sometimes, like, we're kind of like jealous that we didn't have that in our generation. It wasn't something that was, it was like you work as hard as you can, and you sort of ignore the pain, and you push through. But I really like the fact that we are thinking more about ourselves now. And I
Mhm.
really saw it, like I said, in COVID, just to see a lot of people just reevaluated them. It's like, what? I really don't like this job. I want to go do something else, or I'll start my own business. And, or I like working from home. What can I do where I can work from home? And so for me, it was kind of exciting to see that. I know some bosses were frustrated because of this, working from home thing, and they wanted everybody to come back to the office. But I was sort of like, I thought it was very interesting that people got a chance to really pursue what they were very interested in, and sort of was a little bit of a wake up call for for the whole country, really. a world,
Yeah, we
really.
have the tools now to work different, and it's a match on both sides, right? What the
Yeah.
employer needs has to be a match and vice versa.
Yeah.
But I think, I think there's just an opportunity to oh, I lost my train of thought. I think there's just an opportunity to be able to have that reflection because it might be surprising to you the result of that self-reflection from time to time as well. So for example, it might mean you actually love where you're at, but the way in which you're investing your time is at conflict, right? It might mean there's times when my calendar is so overloaded that I don't feel satisfied by the end of the day because I was so caught in busyness over impact. And for me, I thrive on the big impact. So it wasn't necessarily saying this is not the place for me, but it was reevaluating how am I spending my time at the place that I'm at. And I also talk about in the book, which I think is important. We all have different personality index, all the tests that you could take, depending on,
Yeah.
if you're larger companies, you might have done that or not, where what makes you thrive and me thrive are so different, right? My PI was I'm a captain. And then another test I took was I was pretty far along on the spectrum within the organization of a futurist mindset. So if you put me in certain situations, I'm going to feel confined or I'm not going to thrive or it's not my work style, it's not all those things. Doesn't mean I'm in the right place, but I needed to maybe adjust so that I could bring all those traits and characteristics that are innate in me to the work that I'm doing, and then it becomes more fulfilling again. So I think that there's different lenses you can evaluate it from, and that's why the pivot could have a lot of different manifestations.
So when we do this, so when we do listen to our bodies and we sort of acknowledge that there's something that we should be doing differently, when we do make these adjustments and redefine success, if you will, potentially,
Yeah.
what happens? What happens to us as leaders when we do that?
I think when we redefine success and the things that really are rooted in what our talents are, what makes us thrive, what energizes us versus depletes us, then our success is more sustainable.
Mm,
You could be at the top of your game and it's still not sustainable, right? Because it's not the things for you. And so that's why it's really important to understand those things. And I think we don't take enough time along the way a lot to have that self-reflection, that self-love, that's that acceptance of it. We live so much in this society, this social mirror, that we're seeing everybody else's sizzle reel of success and we
yeah.
benchmark it against achievements versus what makes us feel fulfilled. And if you compare to people, maybe you have somebody who's, I mean, money always makes people happy, but you might have somebody who is making multiples of the next person, but this person's living in a space that gives them that fulfillment because it's aligned with who they are. I think that they're going to sustain more so than the other person. And so to me, that's the redefinition of success that I've been on this journey finding through dialogue and conversation since I had my moment because
Yeah.
I'm getting to see and experience how different that feels, and it feels really energizing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I know for me, I was definitely burnt out in my corporate life after 22 years. And it wasn't until I, started my own business, I felt that energy again. I'm like, this is exciting. I'm doing something new.
Yeah.
You talked about impact over busyness. I think my corporate life was busy. I was traveling all over the world. I was in meetings all the time, PowerPoint presentations, but I never felt like I was, doing anything. I felt like I was just busy all the time. And I think when I was
Hmm.
building a company from scratch, that was building something is very fulfilling. I remember like in high school and college I worked, I did residential construction. We built houses, and I always felt like at the end of the day you go back and you look like there's a house or there's part of a house we built. And then I felt like a lot of times in corporate we're just doing emails all day and we're not building anything, so you don't
Yeah.
see the result of the end of the day. And I think I felt that way in my corporate life. I felt like I was just running on a treadmill, and every year they would turn up the treadmill, right, and make you run
Mm.
faster. And I think that when I stepped away from that and went on my own, that was where I really found a lot of joy, and I kind of get revigorated. So I think what you're saying is that when you do get the alignment right, then it's much more sustainable. it makes much more sense. You feel better about yourself. You're doing what you've been put on earth to do, or what your new purpose is, and it feels good.
It feels good. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that scale that you talked about, that corporate, they have to create a different kind of machine to scale. That works for a certain group of people really well. And that's really
yeah,
exciting for them too, right? It's just, it's just giving yourself the grace and the permission to say, you know, what makes me excited is something different. And that's okay.
yeah, yeah. So if we have anybody on those listening in right now, and they feel like they're a bit misaligned, but maybe not
Mhm.
ready for a full pivot, what's a practical step they can take to maybe move towards something more sustainable for them?
Sure, yeah. So in the book, every chapter has lessons from the different people that I interviewed and different themes. And then at the end of the book, there's actionable worksheets. So this is from one of those worksheets. A good starting point is just that energy audit. So, um, just as you said, you felt that energized, right? And that's why it's so important also. And that's why it's more sustainable. Because I also talk in the book about positive stress versus negative stress. And negative stress is really what gets released in those things that deplete you and stress you. And then when you have positive stress, that's the dopamine fixes, and then you feel
Yeah,
energized and
yeah.
excited. And so just look at your week and say, okay, this week I'm going to make two columns, or you can use the worksheet. Here's all the things that energized me, and here's all the things that depleted me. And take stock of those two lists, and then look at the list of the things that depleted you. And depending where you're at in your career, you might ask the question a little bit differently. But um, are those things that I could delegate? Are those things that I can simplify? If you're more senior in your career, you have more agency of what you could delegate. If you're more junior in your career, it might be what could you simplify, right? And and if you're more senior and it's something that you depletes you and is not your superpower, then you should ask yourself, why aren't you delegating it?
Mm, yes.
Is it because you have to learn to trust? Is it because you have to train up the team? Do you have the right team? But you need to evaluate those things and then pick something you take off your plate. If you can delegate it, and then if it's you're early in your career, what's the thing you can simplify, right? Or what's the thing you can opt out of? There's certain things you can't, but maybe you don't join everything after work, right? You're making space in that way, and then see how that feels. It's always important, I think, to take stock of what those little movements feel like so that you can understand the benefit of it, because I think that that's what's going to get you to continue to come back to lean into that practice. Just like when you exercise and you get into better shape and you start with 1 mile and then you get excited about it, and then all of a sudden your body's wanting 2 miles and three. Like, so it's good to incorporate that into it. And I think that's a good first step. And pick one thing. Just pick one thing you take off your calendar and just see how that feels. And then revisit with that. And then, you pick your next step.
I love that. I love it. And often I do coach entrepreneurs, and one of the things I say is, like, one of the most powerful words you can use is no. So we tend to say
Yes.
yes to everything, right? We think we can do it all, and I think sometimes, to your point, we need to either delegate or simplify or find ways so that we're not, that energy audit, which I really like what you're talking about there, is look throughout your week. Where are you getting excited? You can't wait for that meeting, right? You can't wait to
Great.
talk to this customer. And then there's those, and I don't want to do this, like, for me, expense reports. I hate expense reports. it's like
Yeah.
it's like
I don't
I'm
think you're
gonna
alone in that.
so it's like I'm not a detailed person. I don't want to sit there and do spreadsheets all day. So yeah, that how do I delegate that? How do I have that
Mhm.
done where I don't have to spend my time doing it, and just make sure that I'm working on, because I think one of the things that's really important in what you're putting out here, which I think listeners, you need to hear this, is that if we want to be effective leaders, we need to be sustainable leaders. We need to be there for the long term, right? It's
Mhm.
no good if we hustle and we work and we push through and we burn out and we're not there for our people. That's not leadership. We need to be there for our people, and the way to be there for the people is to have a way that we can do this in a sustainable way, in a long term way, right? So I think, so what you're talking about, this idea of, sometimes you might hear well being, or you might hear,
Mhm.
like, alignment and things like that. People might say, well, those are soft things, and that's not really important, but it is important if you want to be able to be in the fight for the long term.
It's so important. And I will tell you, when you have a medical moment, 100%, my mantra was well-being is not a side project. And
Yeah.
it tends to be, it tends to be. It didn't make my important list, even though my whole body was telling me this. But when it stops you in your tracks, you remember that. My hope is people don't have to get to that point to remember that. But our body's all connected. So when you're living in that space of energized, right, and it's sustainable, it's because you are making well-being part of your infrastructure, right? Mentally, physically, that's what gives you the longevity in whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what else in the book that, that might be interesting for our listener to hear about this in the book?
I think, it's just through the stories. I mean, the reason I didn't want it to just be my point of view is the openness of all of these women that I spoke to, sharing their vulnerable moments, their learnings from that. And I think you'll see, my hope is there'll be one or two stories that really has that resonance. I mean, it's
Mm.
really stories for anybody. There's maybe one chapter that's pretty female specific because we hit upon perimenopause and menopause because you kind of, how do you not? But otherwise, a lot of the messages are really, everybody has this question about what do I do about intuition? Is it real? How
Mm.
do I incorporate that? What are the signals that allow me to trust my gut, but I don't? Understanding positive stress and negative stress. I think there's a high level maybe awareness of it, but I think you can learn a lot if you understand the science of it and how it's a real thing that impacts you.
Yeah.
Um, and you have the choices of how you expose yourself to that. And I think in the world we live in today, I know you said, right, Gen X, me too, like it's go, go, go and all this stuff,
Yeah.
but the younger generations, I think, are more attuned to it, but they don't have less challenges in that we do, and that they're living this always connected, constant
Yeah.
world that
Yeah.
keeps you in flight or fight mode
Yeah.
almost all the time.
Yeah.
And that is not healthy for us. And
Mm.
what happens is we can misconstrue that heightened state for we're energized and this is good adrenaline.
Mm.
But we lose the ability to differentiate between what's positive stress and negative stress, except for maybe we'll recognize I feel depleted at the end of the day and not energized, but we don't have systems in place to be able to decipher between the two and say, like, when I live more of my day in that positive stress, I feel totally different than when I'm living most of my day in that negative stress. But I'm in the hamster wheel of just go, 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 answering Teams, answering Instagram, answering LinkedIn, going on Substack, going to my email, getting a phone call, like
Mm.
all the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's hard to decipher those things. And I think through just reading these stories of others who have had experiences and sharing their learnings, I just think you'll realize there's so many people that kind of have had these experiences too. So it's not necessarily unique, but it's also not unique that we're just powering through it and we don't have to.
I love that. Yeah, I think probably the older I am, the more time I have, been in the workplace. Intuition, gut. I think is I listen to that a lot more than I used to. So I think I would push through stuff when I was younger, but I'm older now. It's like, okay, like you feel something about somebody, like something's off with this person, or something's off with this customer, like I sense it a lot more. I'm much more alert to it than I was when I was younger. And I think it's just
Mhm.
maybe experience or what have you. But I think those things are really important. I think we can't just ignore those signals that we get. And I think that's why I like what you're writing about is that the signal could be it's time to make a shift, it's time to make a pivot, and like you said, it might just be 45 degrees, but it
Right.
might be 90, and it could be 180, right? So yeah, but I think being open to those voices, or in some cases physical manifestation of a signal, you can't ignore it, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That was my biggest lesson of January 2024.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been a fun discussion. I really like it because I know I've pivoted many times in my career. I know our listeners have as well. And I think you're giving us some really practical advice about the idea of listening to the signals and sort of thinking through what that means. And again, I love the whole idea of an energy audit and sort of seeing that's a way to tell, okay, what is where is my positive energy coming
Mhm.
from, right? And where is the negative energy coming from? And that really will help you sort out, is it a 45-degree shift or a 90-degree shift, right? Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that's such good stuff. So, well, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
I think it's important just take it in stride to pick one or two things. And it's not it's like what they say about, doing those diets or making big change. Maybe think about the big thing you want to achieve, but create little milestones along the way so that success feels attainable, so that
Hmm.
you can acknowledge when you're making, what does 25% look like? What does 50% look like? What does 75% look like? What I learned as I got to 25 and 50 and 75. All of those things I think will help you get there on your journey and will give you the support you need as well to be successful to get to that 100% on your journey.
I love it. I love it. Small corrective changes. See the impact. Don't try to do it all at once. Don't try to. Everybody wants to lose 20 pounds on January 1st. Don't do it. do it. Do it over time. Yeah, make those adjustments. I think that's fantastic. Well, how can our listeners find out more about you and this new book? It's called The Purpose Pivot.
Sure. So it's available globally, so you can go to Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Target, Google it in general. You'll find it online and in bookstores. And I also am active on Instagram at Purpose Pivot with Melissa. I'm getting more active on that. So been sharing little sound bites from the books, but also as I'm having these dialogues and new things come up in conversation, really wanting to continue to share those learnings and those tips. And so those are probably the two of the best ways.
Well, fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of Melissa's resources. And again, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, you know what? I'm getting all those signals. I don't know what they mean. Now I have some clarity just having to listen to this discussion. Yeah, get this book. We'll have the link right here in the show notes. Get this book, read through it, see the experiences of other people. I think, a lot of times we think we're in it alone. We're the only ones having these feelings. And I think this book is going to show you there's many people who go through these experiences. And I think from my perspective, I've been through some shifts. I've always been better on the other side. Right. And so I think sometimes it's scary, like we don't want to make a
Mhm.
shift, but sometimes when we make those shifts, life gets so much better because we've listened to our bodies, we listened to the signals, and we made a shift that makes sense for our energy. So yeah, don't ignore
Exactly.
those messages. So
Yeah.
Melissa, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think his book is really important for everyone. I think the hustle culture, the grind culture, I think can be very destructive if we don't listen to our bodies and make that adjustment. Don't wait until it's too late, I guess, before you make a change. So, Melissa, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this book and sharing your journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.